One love, y'all. I'm Pastor Todd. This is Unchurched. Really happy to be spending this time with you as we continue our series, What He Said, where I'm exploring what Jesus had to say about life, God, and the meaning of everything. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like. Consider subscribing. It's one of the best ways to help support this channel. And maybe even jump onto our Patreon list. You can find me on patreon.com/Unchurched. Really do appreciate your time and hope that you leave here today a little more encouraged than you were when you first showed up. So today I want to talk about settling disputes. I want to explore what Jesus had to say about settling disputes, settling arguments. So if you have ever found yourself in a situation where you're dealing with relational difficulty, or maybe you've even found yourself at a relational impasse, what he said about it today is really going to help you. So here's what he had to say about settling disputes. We're in the Gospel of Matthew. We're in chapter 18, and we're reading just 5 verses today, verses 15 through 20, kind of the loose translation, Matthew 18, 15 through 20. Here's what he said about settling disputes. Moreover, if your brother should commit an act of sin, be going, show him his sin with a view to convicting him of it and bringing about a confession between you and him alone. If he hears you, you won your brother over. But if he does not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 besides, in order that upon the basis of the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3, every word may be established. He's quoting Moses right there, so he's literally quoting Jewish law. And if he is unwilling to hear them, tell the assembly, tell the ecclesia, tell the church, tell the community. And if he also is unwilling to hear the assembly, let him be to you as the pagan Gentile and the tax collector, so walk away. Assuredly, verse 18, I'm saying to you, whatever you forbid on earth shall have already been forbidden in heaven. And whatever you permit on earth shall have already been permitted in heaven. Again, assuredly I'm saying to you, if 2 of you upon the earth are in agreement concerning every matter of which they ask, that something be given them, it shall become theirs from the presence of my Father who is in heaven. I could preach a whole series on that one verse. For where there are 2 or 3 who have been joined together in my name, get this, with the result that I am the common object of their faith, there I am in their midst. So I'm so thankful that I get to unpack this with you today. A very famous passage here from Jesus, and one that I think has been interpreted and applied wrongly by many preachers for many years. And so I hope that I can maybe give you an alternate way of approaching this today. So when it comes to dealing with relational conflict, all right, that's what we're talking about when it comes to dealing with relational conflict. First thing I want to invite you to do is to remember that it's not if but when. This touche, preacher. It's not if but when. We get this at verse 15. If your brother sins against you. So in my notes here, I replaced the if with a when, and I put it in brackets out of reverence for the text. So whenever you substitute a word in the text, you're supposed to put it in brackets to show that it's been a substitution. So that's what Pastor Todd here has done. I've changed the if your brother should sin against you to when your brother sins against you. Because if we know anything about life and people, it's that we're constantly sinning against one another. What is sin, you might ask? Look, from a New Testament perspective, from Jesus' perspective, sin, hamartion is the New Testament word, means to simply miss the mark. And so I think if you think about it that way, like I say sin, you think like bad things. You think like doing bad things that churchy people don't want you to do. It's much, in some ways, less than that, much more than that. So I think from Jesus' perspective, to sin is to miss the mark. And if you interpret it that way, we all miss the mark all the time. Okay, so all of us are guilty as charged. And you know this from your relational context. Why? What's the one thing about people? They're always fighting. Aren't you so tired of this in the political realm? It's so depressing. People are always fighting. Aren't you tired about this in our highly polarized world? It's so depressing. Yesterday I was on a sail with somebody who grew up in Lebanon, and I grew up in Israel. And we had a great conversation just trying to make peace between ourselves. And almost it was like we were apologizing to each other for hating one another all these years, even though we never knew one another. And so that was just such a window into the way in which, we have these systematized, institutionalized, deeply seated hatreds of one another, that when you put, 2 people on a boat together in the sunshine, all that conflict, really just seems kind of ridiculous. It really seems kind of unnecessary. But man, don't we just live our lives constantly in conflict with one another? Yes, we do. Why? Because people suck. My friend Chris Jones puts it this way. It's one of my favorite things he ever said. He said, people are the worst kind of people. So Nikki, my wife, and I quote this to one another all the time when we're dealing with horrible, ugly people. We're just like, oh, well, People are the worst kind of people. It's as if to say, what else did you expect? This is what people do. People get into conflict. Why? I talked about this last week. Because we are relentlessly self-interested. Self-interest is the original sin. Self-interest is the problem with humanity. It's why nobody can ever get along, because nobody ever wants to surrender their agenda. No one ever wants to work for the benefit of another. Everyone always wants to work for the benefit of themselves. Now, yes, I'm speaking hyperbolically, but that is the reason that our world is so messed up, because we are selfish. And that is why we are always fighting, and that is why we are always in conflict. So just realize that that's going to be the way you relate to most people. Okay, most of the people you know in life, there's going to be an undercurrent of conflict. And if it isn't there, it's just waiting for a moment to show up. Okay, you can get along hunky-dory with people as long as your self-interest aligns. But the moment that your self-interest diverges from theirs, conflict. It's going to happen. So if you want to avoid being disillusioned, disillusion yourself up front. Okay, being disillusioned is a good way to avoid being disillusioned. You're like, okay, disillusion, to not suffer from illusion. Okay, to not suffer from illusion when it comes to relational conflict would be to say, look, people suck, I suck, things are going to get ugly, it's just a matter of time. Therefore, when things get ugly, you go, all right, that's how it is. And you don't become disillusioned, you don't become depressed because you're like, what's the point of living? Everyone's always in conflict, life is terrible, I hate it. If you know in advance that that's probably how it's going to go, when it does go that way, you're prepared for it. Now, look, there's of course another way, and we'll get to that. And that's what Jesus was all about, was introducing that other way. Jesus was all about introducing the way of selflessness, and that was, it still is so radical that most people just can't seem to hear it. So, number one thing to do is recognize that relational conflict is normal. Don't be shocked when it arises. In fact, be prepared for it, because it's going to happen. And if you're prepared for it, then hopefully you have a strategy for how to deal with it when it shows up. The other thing to do when it comes to seeking to settle relational issues is to remember Jesus' relational repair process. So he here in Matthew 18 introduces a relational repair process. And this is so important. This is one of those things that you really need to sear in your mind and remember. You should write it down and apply this. Now, I'm sad to say that churchy people don't apply this one. I've experienced this myself multiple times. People don't come to you first, then bring 2 or 3 witnesses, then bring you before these. They don't do this. They just write you off right off the top. So it's just over, done, see you later. Okay, so I've experienced this. It's going to happen. Just because Jesus taught this doesn't mean that Jesus' so-called people do this. But we can't take responsibility for Jesus' so-called people. We can take responsibility for us. So all that you and I can do is look at Jesus' relational repair process here and do what we can to learn to begin walking in it day by day. So here's what he said about how to repair a relationship. He said, so when your brother sins against you, first go to him between the 2 of you alone, with the hope of getting a confession from him. So he's saying, go to them, confront them, say, look, here's what you did. It's not okay. You need to make it right. So first step 1 is 1-to-1. Okay, so relational repair process from Jesus, step 1, 1-to-1. You go to that person, just the 2 of you, and try to settle it. Tell them what they did, ask them to make it right, and if they confess and make it right, then you've won your brother. Hooray, Jesus says. You've done a good thing. You've repaired that relationship. That's the ideal scenario. So I suggest that the second someone does this, that you just bring it up. Don't sit on it. Don't dwell on it. Don't let it fester. Don't let it become poisonous. If someone sins against you, meaning if someone misses the mark relationally with you, just go to them and tell them with the hope of getting them to admit it and hoping, of course, that they will make it right. If that happens, you've won them over. You've done a good thing. You've added some peace to the world. Now, we all know that it's rare for that to happen. I have friends with whom that's been the case. Most of my good friends, that's why our relationship is good, because we do this, we talk about it, we apologize, we make it right, we move on. But with most people, it doesn't work like that. So, step 2. Step 1 is 1-to-1. Step 2 is 2 or 3. Easy, right? Step 1, 1-to-1. Step 2, 1 or 2, or 3. Jesus says. So he says, if they won't hear just you, take 2 or 3 witnesses, that on the word of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. So he's quoting Moses there. That's part of the Mosaic law, that any trespass in Judaism required 2 or 3 witnesses, because obviously it's like he said, she said, he said. How do we know it's true? If there are 2 or 3 witnesses, then you're onto something. So that's the next step. Bring 2 or 3 witnesses. So let me just challenge you. If you are looking to correct somebody, make sure you have witnesses. If you don't have witnesses and you still convict them, you're offside. You're not aligned with the way of Jesus. Okay? Jesus says 2 or 3 witnesses are required. So 1-to-1, 2, or maybe 3. And then if they still will not hear you, he says, take it to the ecclesia, take it to the community, take it to the church. So he's speaking here to his followers. He's saying, listen, if they won't listen to you, if they won't listen to you or 2 or 3 others, then you need to bring them before the whole assembly. So many of these people would have had small churches, 10, 15, 20 people. The whole church in Jerusalem, if it was gathered, who knows how many people would have been at this point. We know that after Jesus died, while they were waiting for him to be resurrected, they were gathered together in the upper room. There's maybe 120 or so. So these are not huge churches. These are small groups of people. They are kind of tightly knit communities. He's saying, if they won't listen to you, if they won't listen to 2 or 3 witnesses, then bring them before the community. So now we escalate it to the community level. Okay, bring them before the church, bring them before the ecclesia. And so that's kind of the last step, right? That's the last resort. And you can imagine, right, doing that is going to be uncomfortable. But that's what he said about solving relational disputes. Now, the last step, so step 1 is 1-to-1, step 2 is 2 or 3, step 3 is before your community. So look, if you're not a member of a church community, for sure you have a community of friends, right? And if one of your friends is offside and they won't listen to you, they won't listen to 2 or 3, then you can take them before the group of friends and you can escalate it to the group and say, listen, there's this issue here that I'm trying to resolve with this person and it's just not working. I've tried by myself. I've tried with Steve and Sarah over there. He still didn't listen to us. So we're coming to you so that hopefully you can help him see the light and hopefully you can pressure him to do the right thing. So that's step 3. If they don't listen after step 3, then you walk away. Crazy, right? That Jesus would say walk away. This guy who taught us the way of self-giving love that does no harm. It's nice to know that Jesus has a limit. Like there's a ceiling. He's like, all right, fine. 1-to-1, 2 or 3, the whole community. If they still won't listen, then you're free to walk away. So if you ever wondered how long you need to stick, that's it. So you're like, wait, didn't he teach us to forgive 70 times 7? Yes, he did. That's forgiveness. This is talking about relational restoration here, right? If someone does not want to be restored to you relationally, at some point you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. At some point you just got to say, all right, fine, it's over. 1-to-1, 2 or 3, the whole group, and then you walk away. That's Jesus's relational repair process. Interestingly here, you're like, wow, that's pretty heavy duty. Well, I think it matters. I think how we relate to one another matters. I think that we have more authority than we think we do. And that's what I think Jesus is talking about here in the whole back section, which has just been horribly misinterpreted and misapplied over the years. Let me read to you as we close verses 18 and 20. Assuredly, I'm saying to you, whatever you forbid on earth shall have already been forbidden in heaven. Whatever you permit on earth shall have already been permitted in heaven. Again, assuredly I'm saying to you, if 2 of you upon the earth are in agreement concerning every matter of which they ask, that something be given, it shall be theirs from the presence of my Father who is in heaven. For where there are 2 or 3 who have been joined together in my name, with the result that I am the common object of their faith, there I am in their midst. So this is really important. This is not, now this is how it's been preached, like for me growing up, and if you're a formerly churchy person, you've heard it preached this way too. This is not whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This was taught that way in the charismatic movement for years, that if you bind it here, it's bound in heaven. If you loose it here, it's loosed in heaven. The problem with that is if you bind sickness here and you believe it's bound in heaven, but the person stays sick, then all of a sudden you're like, what? Is the Bible lying? Is Jesus lying to me? Whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. If you loose prosperity on earth and it's therefore loosed in heaven, but you stay poor, you're like, is Jesus lying to me? So how often do we do this? So often. This is why you're not to use the Bible as a weapon, right? You're not to use the Bible to prove a point. Okay, the Bible does not exist for those reasons. The Bible exists to show you and teach you and lead you into the story, the big, big story of God and his people, a story that is still unfolding. Okay, yes, this document is closed, but the story that this document exposes is not closed. Okay, it's meant to invite you into that story, to introduce you to the nuances of it, to introduce you to the personalities, the big personalities in that story, and to hopefully help you find your place in that story as you identify with the characters you meet in the story. That's what the Bible's about. It's not meant to be used as a weapon. It's not meant to be used to prove a point. So when you take a verse like this, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven, you can literally lead millions of people into sin, error, and misery for the rest of their life because you've taught them that if they bind something on earth, it's bound in heaven. If you loose something on earth, it's loosed in heaven, as if they have some kind of superpower. And that's not what he said at all. It's not what he said at all. What did he actually say? Listen carefully. Whatever you forbid on earth shall have already been forbidden in heaven, and what you permit on earth shall have already been permitted in heaven. What's he saying? He's saying if you live this way, if you begin to learn to walk in relational wholeness, you will be in alignment with the divine life. You will be doing things that have already been done in heavenly places. Like mind-bending. It's totally different. He's saying by learning to live a selfless life, you are learning to live in harmony with the divine life. You are now doing things that have already been done. You're forbidding things that have already been forbidden. Why? Because you're living heaven's way. Woo! You're allowing things that have already been allowed in heaven. Why? Because you're living heaven's way. It's like you've jumped in the river and you're flowing downstream. Hallelujah. It's not that you now have some superpower where you can command things to come into existence. No, it's not about that at all. It's about living connected to the divine life. It's about living in harmony with Jesus and his way. It's already done. You are the issue. I'm the issue. Okay? It's already done. We need to begin living in harmony, with what has already been done. Living Jesus' way puts you in sync with the rhythms of the divine life. And look, if the story's not true, all this is bunk. It's a total waste of your time. If the story's true, if there is a God, if he does have a life, if it's a life that you can connect to, wouldn't you want to connect to it? Yeah, you would. It'd be like the most important, most awesome thing you could do in your whole life is to connect to that divine source, right? Like even if you don't believe in God, but you believe somehow in the universe or some kind of, supernatural force, well, wouldn't you want to be connected to that if you could? Yes, you would. This is what Jesus is saying. Saying if you learn to live selflessly, which is the key to mending in this context relationships, you will be in alignment with the divine life. You will be in alignment with the way things truly are. So you got me, Todd. I want it. How do I live that way? You make Jesus the object of your faith. Whew! Somebody shout in this house. I can't wait till I preach this live in a few weeks in Oakville. Let's close with verse 20. Hallelujah. For where there are two or three who have been joined together into my name, with the result that I am the common object of their faith, there I am in the midst. Who is this guy? He's either God or he's a madman, because he thinks that if he is the object of his people's faith, then he's literally there in the midst. That literally the life of God is in the midst of those people who have made Jesus the common object of their faith. You just got the answer to what it looks like to live a Christian life. To live a truly Christian life means to make Jesus the object of your faith. Period. Full stop. Don't add nothing to that. Don't subtract nothing from that. Okay? All your religious mumbo jumbo, it's garbage. It's worthless. Okay? All you need is Jesus as the common object of your faith. When we have Jesus, only Jesus. When we have Jesus as the common object of our faith, there he is in the midst. By extension, when Jesus is the common object of your faith, you are connected to the divine life. Jesus wants to be the center of your life. That's what he wants. That's what he's asking for. This is why real Christianity is just so darn hard, because nobody wants to make someone other than himself the center of themselves. But Jesus says he wants to be the center of you. I'm here to tell you, that's not the only way to live in peace, okay? It's the only way to live, period. That's the way I want to live, and I know the same is true for you. Next week, what I hope will be the most important sermon in this entire series, what he said about the only thing that matters. We'll see you then.